Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Guerra, and today I have a very special guest. I'm so excited. I'm joined today by Paulette Erato.
Hello.
Hi. Paulette and I met fairly recently through the podcast world, and she is a lovely, lovely human being. I'm super excited for all of you to get to know her here on my podcast. So, Paulette has a podcast, of course. Paulette's podcast is called La Vida Más Chévere. And Paulette is also the founder of Latinas in Podcasting. So Paulette is amazing, and I love you really are, and I love that Paulette is really from the brief time that I've just met her very recently, like just the way that you provide space and you open up conversation and you help make connections to other women and podcasters in general, right? I think it's really fantastic because not everyone's like that, not everyone has that that gracious kind of like sharing energy. So I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. I'm
Yeah.
excited to be here and excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. But yeah, my entire philosophy towards life is that there are a lot of options other than the propaganda we've been fed from, birth.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to help you explore those options. And at the same time, I don't want to gatekeep anything I know because knowledge is meant to be shared.
I love it. Yes, exactly. The sharing of knowledge and stuff. It is fantastic. Yay. All right, so let's get started. On the podcast, I love talking about culture, having Latinas share their cultural background because everyone has a different experience. Some of us grow up in urban areas, some in, more suburban areas. Being from the West Coast is different from being from the Midwest. And all the rest, right? And so I would love for you to share, Paulette, a little bit about your background and how you self-identify or how you understand your own Latina identity.
Whew, yes. So I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, California. The outskirts of LA. I'm a Valley girl through and through.
I love it.
Like, but I am the eldest daughter of
that's so funny. Wow, that's crazy.
Of a Mexican immigrant and a Puerto Rican father. So my mother is the one who immigrated from Mexico, not legally. So there's always that extra layer, right?
Sure, yeah.
And I have a ton of privilege. I grew up in a suburb with really good school districts, and I had a lot of opportunities from very early in life, and still have managed to falter. Not live up to my parents' expectations, because as the eldest daughter, we all know that everything rests on us, right?
Right.
I have abdicated that role. After 46 years, I'm done. Yeah. But growing up, it was really funny. I love this story. So when I was 8, I lived in a part of the Valley that's very close to the largest congregation of Armenians in the Armenian diaspora. So I grew up right outside of Glendale. And so for anybody who doesn't know, Glendale has very high concentration. Yeah. and it's on the way east end of the Valley. And some people, they say it's not the Valley, but it is. Anyway, a little girl who was of Armenian descent asked me in third grade, we were 8 years old. She goes, "Do you speak Mexican?" And I was like, "No, it's called Spanish." And so I got to learn a little bit about her culture, and she got to learn a little bit about my culture, and then we went and played, and I think that is a beautiful story because as you get older, people still ask that question, but they don't have the innocence of an 8-year-old. So growing up Mexican and Puerto Rican meant that a lot of my cultural, the food that we eat is mixed. It's a fusion. So we're doing fusion in my house before fusion was even a word in the culinary world, right? And I didn't know the difference between, or I didn't know that refried beans were Mexican. Arroz con gandules or arroz con habichuela is Puerto Rican. Right. And those two things are not had at dinner at every house. So yeah,
that's so funny.
But
I love it.
And and being Latina in Los Angeles, most people assume you're Mexican.
Sure.
So there's very, very, very few Puerto Ricans.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny is the Puerto Rican side of my family, some of the men also married Mexican women. Again, it's about proximity. And so all of their children are also half Puerto Rican and half Mexican. And I said this on another podcast, that there were very few other people with that makeup in Los Angeles that I wasn't related to. I met one my entire life when I was in my 30s.
My family.
Right. I'm funny. Like, are you sure you're not family? And then we dated for a little while, and then it turned out that that was not good. But for reasons not related to the culture.
That's so funny.
And then I went and I lived in Puerto Rico for a little while, and being able to explore the Puerto Rican side of my identity when I had grown up for most of my life more closely related to the Mexican side of my identity, because I also mentioned this on another podcast. My father's family mostly lived on the East Coast. He was raised in New York City.
Right.
And his eldest sister lived out here, my titi Yaya, and she had this big pool. We grew up right down the street from them. And it was a 12-foot deep pool. So that's where I learned to swim. They still had a diving board. This is the 80s we're talking about. You know, you're not allowed to have those things anymore in California. Not that deep a pool, and definitely not a diving board. But they moved back to the East Coast when I was about 10 years old. And that kind of severed that connection, because there was no more family, the Puerto Rican side of the family, close by, and our Mexican side of the family was always close by. My mom has another sister who lived here, lives here. She has another aunt who, until her death, lived here as well. So it's always been a little, I hate to use the word exotic, but it was exotic to be Puerto Rican amongst Mexicans. Now, when I went to school on the East Coast and found a little Puerto Rican enclave in Philadelphia, I was so freaking happy. Just being Latina at an Ivy League school, that was weird. That was really weird.
Stick out. Yeah, exactly.
I connected with just, you know, but I also got to meet other Puerto Ricans who weren't Mexican. So
surprise, surprise. Yeah, exactly.
Just so they had no connection to that side of my culture. So that was also really unique and fun. Moving to Puerto Rico and being a Puerto Rican, but not really being a Puerto Rican, porque no es de aquí.
Right.
So it's just been a jumble.
Like the kind of sort of.
Yeah. And, you know, my accent is complete trash. So, of course, they're like, Americana. Some woman actually yelled that at me. I'm like, I'm just trying to be here. But it was really important to me that when my husband started learning to speak Spanish, that he picked up that Caribbean cadence. That I've always loved. This is why the name of my show is La Vida Más Chévere, as opposed to La Vida Más Chido or algo así, because the word chévere is a connection to that part of my childhood, to that Puerto Rican connection that I had as a child. So, because the only people I ever heard say that were my aunt and uncle.
Totally.
Who then moved to the East Coast. So that's what that's about. I love being Latina. This is something you can never take away from me, but it was always, you know, growing up and in mostly a white community, there was a sense of otherness. Going to school on the East Coast, huge sense of otherness. Living even in Puerto Rico, sense of otherness. So it's a thread I've had to, you know, like putting it through the needle is it's a fine little dance.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it. We have a lot in common. So I've shared before on the podcast, I grew up in Los Angeles. I'm half Ecuadorian, half Guatemalan. Didn't come across any Ecuadorians outside of like my small group of my family for a long time. I was floored when I went to New York for the first time. I was like, oh my God, so many Ecuadorians. It was crazy. It was amazing. And then, here in LA, it's true. Everyone assumes being in LA that you're a Mexican American, right? And Guatemala's a different country. You know, it's different music, different customs, right? It's those nuances. It's like, yes, we're all Latina, but it's a little different, you know? I remember the first time I really like spent significant time around the Puerto Rican community and Dominican community was on the East Coast, because I spent like several summers going to workshops and things at Princeton Seminary as part of the Hispanic Theological Initiative. So and it was like, whoa, brilliant Latinos. We all have PhDs and masters and things. This is right. It's like, this is crazy. You know, it was very awesome. And it's true. Same thing going to Berkeley. I was the only woman. I think I mentioned this in our cafecito the other day. I was the only woman in my theology cohort in the program. Right. So they have different disciplines, fields, right? Like some are doing Bible, some do liturgy, etc. But for systematic theology, there was 4 of us and I was the only woman. So, you know, but I feel, oh man, it's wild. That's so crazy. So much in common. It's kind of surreal, huh? When you come across another person, like, oh my God, I know exactly what you mean. And I'm also the eldest daughter. Wild. How many siblings do you have? I meant to ask you this.
So my father was married before he met my mom. They had been divorced for a while. So I have an older brother. We're 11 years apart. And then I have a younger brother, and we're only 3 years apart. But the three of us all grew up in the same house. So I only mentioned that my older brother is from a different marriage so that people understand that why that age gap exists. Right. We're all blood. Like there's never been a like, you're not so-and-so's kid. Yeah, no. And in fact, like, you know, his mom lives with him and she embraces us as part of the family. You know, like it's just like, it's beautiful. Like bonus people in your life, kind of like being a child-free Latina, you know, like that rich auntie stereotype. We're not, I love it. But I am the tia, I am the titi. And it's like, you know, you have bonus adults in your life. I'm one of those bonus adults too.
Yeah, that is super cool. That's really, really awesome. So I have a younger brother and we are almost a decade apart, you know, same parents, but it's just how life happened, you know? And thankfully, like we are really close despite like a big age gap, but yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's beautiful when siblings are close. I think it's awesome. The other kind of topic that I love to have my guests talk about is their experience or understanding of faith, right? And I say faith because I understand that people, you know, sometimes they might have experience with organized religion or might not. They may have moved in a different direction in terms of spirituality, spiritual practices. Like I still identify as a Roman Catholic and I love tarot. You know, I have my crystals and my tarot. And for some people that may be very odd, right? That may seem like a conflict. Like, what does that mean? It's like in my worldview and my understanding of divinity and God, etc., it works, right? Like I see how they can fit together. So yes, so I would love to hear from you.
You know, as Mexican Puerto Rican, I grew up Roman Catholic as well. I got really bored in church really early, as I'm sure most kids did. Like, no kid loves going.
It's not very exciting. I'm sorry. It's like for children especially.
You know what I miss is when the Catholic Mass was in Latin, because at least then there was like, there's like incense and stuff. But now it's not in Latin anymore, and it stopped being in Latin when I was like 6, you know,
Vatican II. Yep. It changed.
Maybe. Yeah. There you go. Yep. I don't have a lot of love for the Catholic Church. In college, independent of anything else that was going on around me. I have a degree in history from UCLA. So it was a long path back home.
I love
it. But the first few classes I took when I transferred to UCLA were on world history and like the story, how religion played into history.
Oh yes.
And like ancient India and
Empire,
all of these,
you know.
Yes, exactly. All of these different regions of the world that are not touched by Christianity necessarily. And the worldview was so cosmically different from what I had grown up with that it really made me start to question. At this point, I had stopped going to church. Like I was never super religious. I was made to do all of the sacraments up to whatever it is when you're 15.
It's cultural. Yeah. Continue.
So in college, I was like, these stories we've been told are just categorically false. There's no reconciling them in my head. At the same time, my parents were actually also going through a reckoning where they didn't want to be involved with the church either. Now, they could never be married in the church because my father is a divorced man. So they didn't have a church wedding. And then neither did I, but we're not there yet. So in college, I just really started seeing all of the things that I had questioned for a long time unraveling completely. And I started studying other religions, which were super interesting. The overlap over all of them is interesting. I mean, human morality, no matter how you approach it, is kind of the same. You know, basically the overarching rule was the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated, right?
In general, yeah.
It's distorted this way, that, and the other, but what we learned in kindergarten is still holds. So that's just how I've tried to live my life since. I don't consider myself an atheist because I think that also is a problematic sect of people. I don't ascribe to any one religion. I don't call myself even a lapsed Catholic. I'm just agnostic and I'm comfortable. I like hearing people talk about religion. I don't like being religioned at. You know what I'm saying? I don't like having to feel like I have to do what your religion says. I know that morally we're all gray human beings, and some people have to cling to something in order to feel morally good, and that's fine. No judgment. But I know that I don't, and that I might be morally gray, but also I'm a better person than I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I'm just going to continue to try to be a better person.
Yeah. You know, I appreciate that. I appreciate everything that you've shared. Yeah, actually, that's one of the most fascinating things that I've kind of similarly, I'm like, man, the world religions kind of have the same gist if you look at it, right? It's like, you know, I've same as you. Like, I've taken classes on Islam, taken classes on Judaism, you know, Buddhism, etc. I'm like, wow, it's kind of the same message. Why are we always fighting and trying to prove what one is like? Why? You know, like killing each other off or whatever. Stop. You know, I'm kind of like, can we stop? Anyway, but yeah, it is amazing how similar they are. And I don't know, more and more, I'm like, maybe the creator is like much bigger and much more complex than we could ever imagine. That, and in other words, like, there is room, you know, like there is actually room in the creator, you know, for all of these things to exist at once, right?
Without one being more
correct.
Right than the other, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. I feel that organized religion is also what we see nowadays. Is it being weaponized to take away women's rights, to strip, you know, autonomy from people, and that is a huge problem, and that is something I want to combat. And what's interesting is, for most of my life, I have disagreed with people who are religious, maybe just because of the environments I found myself in. As an adult, in this second half of my life, especially post-COVID, post the first Trump administration, all of these things, the more religious people I come into contact with, like you, like some other people in our group, we are all of the same mindset that there's something wrong, and religion is being weaponized to fight
absolutely
us. So that's really interesting that that's happening.
Yeah, it's so true. It kind of begs the question of like, okay, if this person's wrong and this person's wrong and they're going to hell and then who is safe, right? And that in that same mindset, like who is okay, who is safe, who's doing it right? Nobody. You know, like everyone's going downhill, right? And it's crazy. It is crazy the way that women are still treated, the way children are treated. There's still massive homophobia. There's still massive transphobia, racism. There's a lot, as we know, right? And we're really seeing it. I think undeniably so. You know, yeah, man. It's the weaponizing. Truly, that's what it is. It's the weaponizing. It's so dangerous. I mean, this is why, you know, religious wars, like this is why so many people have died really unnecessarily. Yeah. So. If only we could run the world, Paulette.
I mean, come on, we do a hell of a lot better than whatever the hell's happening now.
Truly. Oh man. Oh, it's so crazy. But Yeah, it's so yeah, really, really, it's fascinating. I mean, I think that's part of what drew me to study it, because I was like, wait a minute, I was like, wait a second, what's really happening here? And because and partially because I had, I had enough negative experiences in the Roman Catholic Church that I wanted to understand, like, what is happening, like what is really going on. I wanted the information of like, okay, I want to read it for myself. What does Augustine say? What does Aquinas say? What do these, 15th century, monks or whatever, what do they say? I want to read it, and so, yeah, but it's this is something that I think is really dangerous and problematic, is how uninformed people are, and ignorant. I hate to say it. And there's so much misinformation floating about. People are getting all of their information from good old TikTok and Instagram and Reddit and whatever, instead of going to the source, instead of reading the book for themselves, instead of reading an article, like a published article. You know what I mean? It's so disheartening, yeah.
Yeah. And right now, the one that's getting my goat, and this is just because of the current events, is that, there's a boycott against Coke, which, yes,
correct.
There's lots of things we should be boycotting. Right. Coke is on the list, but
because they're calling immigration on their workers, on their employees.
That is the rumor.
Thank. Clear it up for us, Paulette. What's really going on?
I went looking for a primary source that actually reported that. Now, our current media is also doing what it's doing, sure, bending the knee. And so we're not getting unfiltered information from our go-to primary soures here. Sure, so they can't be trusted either. But, there's the whole world wide web of sources, and I could not find a single thing. And I was asking in groups that are designed to combat this kind of misinformation. I was like,
show me something.
Like, show me the source. I just want to see the source. Because let's stick to the facts. Like, Coca-Cola has done some heinous things, not just to Latinos, but around the world
in general.
So yes, we should boycott them, but let's be right about it. And I get that that's in the grand scheme of things. Most people are like, who cares? They probably did do this thing. Yes. But
you can't,
but I get, and it's so enticing to believe that because, again, of our current climate.
Because it goes with our assumption.
It fits the narrative.
It's like, oh, Coke is bad, guys. Oh, and now they did something more. Yeah, get rid of it, right? That's kind of like the amped up like energy without verifying. No, it's true. It's without verifying. It is dangerous. Yeah. It is dangerous.
And that's just one example. Wow, every single day we're being assaulted by our consumption of of the media by these things. And it's really hard to separate truth from fact or truth from semi-fact. And so asking these questions, I hope, just kind of stops the avalanche. It's like, okay. In the end, the result is the same, right? Boycott Coca-Cola. They're not great.
The reasons don't really matter. Like in a way.
But at least let's be media savvy.
Yeah. Wow. This is wild. Yeah, this is super crazy. Yeah, it's, oh gosh, the media stuff that's a whole nother can of worms. Oh, this has been so good, Paulette. So I'm curious. Let's see. Well, we'll kind of get into this next. So one of the things that it is kind of a personal mission of mine. One of the things that I've noticed is how many of us have had to grow up very fast. Especially recently, I'm seeing a lot more, let's say, groups or pages dedicated to eldest daughters, right? Especially Latina eldest daughters, women of color eldest daughters, etc. Okay. And so it's one of my missions to kind of have my guests share, two things. Like, what advice would you give young women today? And then more specifically, like, what advice would you give little you? So if you could go back in time and give little Paulette at any age, it can be, 6 years old, 8 years old, 15 years, whatever age you pick. What advice would you give to your younger self?
I actually wrote a book for my younger self. It was ostensibly for my niece when she was going away to college, because she is also an eldest daughter. She's also the only girl of all these grandkids. Not all these, there's 4. So she's the eldest and she's the only girl. And she was also going away to school, to an environment she wasn't necessarily raised in. And so I wrote this book for her about the 5 things I wish I knew when I was going off to college.
That's beautiful.
Can I cuss on your show?
Go for it. Yes.
It's called Benchmarks Are Bullshit. I actually threw in 6 lessons. I was like, bonus.
I love it. I love it.
And it's basically about like, and a part of me was healed. Like, I cried writing it because nobody was able to hold me by the hand when I was 18 years old and thrown out to what felt like the wolves. And Philadelphia was a freaking culture shock, like in so many ways that intersected, not just school. I'm talking Philadelphia,
the whole place.
City. Yeah. It's hard. So coming back to that, my overarching advice to myself has been that benchmarks aren't bullshit. I'm sorry, that benchmarks are bullshit. Because the measurements for success, I heard this in a movie one time, and whoever wrote this line, you are freaking brilliant. Success is measured in units of happiness.
Ooh.
I may not have a well-paying job, but I am a happy person. So financially, success has not been what I was told that living this blueprint, this life script was going to get me. But by this same token, I've been able to step outside of this rat race.
Yes.
And see things a little bit
more objectively.
And realize that the quest that these billionaires in our world can never seem to grasp is that sometimes enough is enough. And again, I've had a lot of privilege. Now, it wasn't necessarily financial privilege. We grew up, we had a house over our heads, and our parents were not wealthy. We lived in the ugliest house on the block, but we still lived in a good part of the city, right? You know, they weren't worried about their kid being stabbed on the way to school or any of these other things which
is a reality for a lot of kids in Los Angeles or many other cities. Yeah.
My brother was just telling me last night that we actually moved out of Burbank and he wasn't telling me this. We moved out of Burbank when I was about 11. So he must've been about 8 and spent my high school years living outside in the Valley. So a little further deeper in Sun Valley. And he was like, yeah, dude, that wasn't really safe. And I was like, wasn't it? He's like, no, there was gang activity at the park. And that's why mom didn't let me go play basketball. That wasn't my experience, but that was my little brother's experience. And he was younger. So more of his formative years were spent in that environment.
Scary. Yeah.
So again, the privilege exists within that 3-year gap. That all being said, little Paulette needed to hear that she was going to be okay. That all of these expectations that felt like a massive burden her whole life, because she had to get into an Ivy League school. She had to get straight A's. She had to perform at her best. That all of those were lies. That there was a different path to success. And thankfully I found it. And I'm still walking it. Okay. I'm not at my success pinnacle.
In process.
Yeah. That'll happen when I'm in the coffin going into the incinerator. That'll be my success pinnacle. Just to say, I'm never going to stop
striving,
continuing to strive for success.
For your vision. I think that's right. I think that's important. It's like your vision, not what culture's telling you, not what society's telling you, your vision for your future, your vision for your happiness and success. Yeah, that's huge. That's huge.
So my podcast, La Vida Más Chévere, is built on the foundation created by Benchmarks Are Bullshit. I love that. It just like in life, everybody else's metrics for success or for moving forward or for being a better person don't necessarily apply to you. And you get to decide if success for you looks like that or this or anything else.
Absolutely. I love this. This is so amazing. And I agree with you 10,000%. I remember, speaking of something about the grades triggered me, that if I remember as a kid, I think especially, was it maybe elementary up to middle school or something, I remember if I didn't get an A, like a solid A, I would flip out. I'm talking A- was failure zone. B+ oh, I might as well just give up on life, right? Like, it was crazy. So much so to where my mom was like, Lauren, if you don't relax, she's like, if you don't relax, I will pull you out of that school because you're going berserk. So, like, side note, like I mentioned, I grew up in Los Angeles. I grew up in Koreatown. Alas, LAUSD in my area was not great when I was growing up. And so my parents made a decision to basically, sacrifice a lot financially and send me to private school. Mm-hmm. And so that, right. And so in terms of like, it was, I'm not going to lie, it was rigorous. You know what I mean? Like, it was my elementary school, my middle school and high school were rigorous. And so that was part of the issue, was like, my mom's like, I'm not sacrificing all this money for you to like have a meltdown and like really like not function anymore. Like, I can't. Mm-hmm. So, but it was like, that's always been kind of, it's like, I don't know if it's the pressure or just wanting to be a perfectionist. I don't know what it is, or a combination of things, child of immigrants. I don't know what it is, but it's too much. It really is too much. And along with what you were sharing too, so I call it the checklist, right? So what is the checklist? The checklist, or the quote unquote American dream, is what? Get your college degree, get married. And there's no order, by the way. Right.
This is what I call the life script, by the way. Exactly.
Okay, cool. Okay. Checklist, life script. We're talking the same language. Yeah. Okay. So college degree, get married, buy a house, have 1, 2, 3 children, 2.5 kids, the cars, whatever, in suburbia, probably. And then right. That is quote unquote the American dream. Man, how many people are in that very, having all those items checked off their list, are deeply unhappy, are deeply miserable, wish they had done something different, wish they could have moved somewhere else. Like, my gosh, that's heartbreaking to me. And I always think of, there's issues with celebrity, right, and stardom. However, I think about someone like Heath Ledger, right? I think about someone like Anthony Bourdain, that they have all the financial freedom in the world. They have reached incredible success in their fields. And yet something is not right. Something is off. Something is not right. It's hard. You know what I mean? And so I think that's kind of the point, is like, it's so important to look inward, and define for oneself. Ooh, I'm getting chills. To define for oneself what that happiness looks like. Mm-hmm. Is it, living in a small apartment in, small town, wherever? Cool. Does it mean like moving to the Amazon, like really off the grid? Go for it, whatever floats your boat, whatever floats your boat. But that's the thing. It's like, it has to be your boat, not what the family said, not what the culture said, not what society said, yeah. No, oh my gosh.
Yeah, the whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses is a lie that capitalism sold us. And it all made us feel insecure if we didn't have that and couldn't keep up with everyone around us. We were doing something wrong, where instead what you were being sold was crushing credit card debt. And you know who doesn't have credit card debt?
All the celebrities. Yeah.
No,
and you,
me.
Yeah,
me. Exactly. I don't have credit card debt.
That's awesome.
And because we live within our means, and that's not always easy. We have friends who take off on vacation 4 times a year. Right. And I drive a 10-year-old car. It's got a Hemi, but that's cool. It's just it's paid off. Exactly. I saw this post, and it was clearly someone very young and inexperienced on Threads recently. And it was like, if you've got a car that's 10 years old or older, why haven't you gotten a new one? And it's like, honey, do you not know what happened over the last 5 years? No. 1, 2, do you know how much a car payment is?
No.
And do you realize you do not have to have the shiniest, newest thing? They'll eventually learn. Hopefully they don't learn after having crippling credit card debt.
Right.
But that's
learn the hard way. Yeah.
You can avoid that. Mm-hmm. You don't ever have to buy into that.
No, it's true. It's so true. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. There is a lot of like, comparison is a thief of joy. Like, stop trying to, okay, if you have trust fund friends and they're spending $800, on a Saturday night, but you don't have it like that, don't do it. Don't do it. They're going to be fine. You're going to be swimming in credit card debt and crying because you have to eat, top ramen for a month. Like, stop, anyway. being a little dramatic.
Exactly.
But it's true. And I can't remember. Oh man, I wish I could remember who it was. But there's one of these like millionaire dudes. He still drives his like 1995 Honda Accord.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them.
Ramit
There you go. I knew you would know. He chooses to spend it other ways. Like he's got it. He could go out and buy, a Range Rover tomorrow, I'm sure. So it's so true. Like that's the whole thing of like turning inward. What do you really want? What kind of life do you really want? If you want the big baller life, that's fine.
That's his philosophy. He's like, let me set you up for your vision of
your rich life.
Of your rich life. Like it's so individual. Yours doesn't have to look like mine. You don't have to drive a 30-year-old Honda. But he puts his money towards luxury vacations. And then he says, I never take a trip that's over 4 hours if I can't be in business class. And people are like, oh, you're too good for it. But he drives a
That's his choice.
Car.
Exactly.
Again, it's just an example. He's not the only example.
There's trade-offs.
He's not without his own faults, I'm sure. I don't know the man, even though he lives in LA too. We should all get together.
Oh, funny. That's awesome.
But my point is that pay more attention to the people who want you to have your unique experience as opposed to the person or the entities painting this picture with a really broad brush of what happiness is if it's not specific to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's so... as we were kind of getting ready to record this session, we were talking, well, we were kind of sharing, like, I love to travel, similarly, like I much rather travel and again, be in first class, business class and stay in beautiful hotels and, have nice evenings, dining, whatever, than own, let's say, like a huge 6-bedroom house here in LA. Like, right? If I had to choose, I would much rather be, traveling abroad. Not to say like, this is not to say a person can't have it all. Sure. That's absolutely, why not? But in terms of like, in a way we do kind of prioritize, right? Like prioritizing, like what are the priorities, right? Paying off debt, getting, keeping the old car, getting a new house, keeping the house, every individual makes those decisions for themselves, or should self-reflect and make those decisions and not be pressured by anybody else.
Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard because you look around and you do compare. You do compare to the people next to you. That was one of those 6 lessons in that book. It was like, cheer on all the people around you that you see succeeding, even if you're not there yet, because all of that is proof that you can too.
Inspiration. Yeah.
You and I had this conversation privately about how you need to surround, not you specifically, but a person needs to surround themselves with people doing the thing they want to do successfully so that you have models and examples that show you can do it. This is why La Vida Más Chévere exists. It is a wealth of examples of women who also are not having children and thriving in their own way. It was really important for me to uplift. I can't be the only example of doing this thing. One, I don't want that burden. But 2, there are so many other people doing it differently than me.
Yeah, doing it differently.
Everybody deserves to hear them too, because the more you see you see people who look like you or sound like you doing something that you want to do, the easier it becomes to believe that you can.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to give 2 like quick examples. So there's a woman, actually I mentioned her also, we're in our cafecito room. There's a woman, her name is Dr. Cleopatra Camperveen. She was a tenure track professor here at USC. She picked up, her husband and her 3 children, and they live abroad now. And everyone gave her, she shared that a lot of people didn't like it. A lot of people thought she was making the biggest mistake of her life. No, she made the greatest decision for her and her family. That's what she did, and then it was interesting also, like on Facebook, I saw, this is tangentially related. Someone had posted like, hey, I live in such and such area of LA. All my friends have children or are about to give, birth to their first kid this year. I want to meet friends. I want to meet, married couples, friends, etc. Is anyone into that? And the response was epic. They're like, yeah. I want friends. I need friends. Me too. I'm child free. Da, da, da. And honestly, it was simply refreshing to see other people being themselves and getting excited to be with other people who have made like a similar decision, you know, versus feeling like outcast, you know, for not having children. Because having children is like, again, it's like the thing to do, I feel like. Right? I'm sorry, you know, God forgive me, you know. It's interesting. It's right. Dare I say, I'm gonna go here, and I hope people will listen. I'm gonna be a little controversial. I actually wonder how many people sit and self-reflect truly about the decision to have children, or is it just a matter of, well, everybody else does it, well, I guess that's just what we're supposed to do? That's my question. My question, right? And now, I'm gonna double down even more. I think that self-reflection needs to happen before you get into a relationship. Because, dare I say, I think that decision is a personal decision in the sense that I don't know that it should really change once you date somebody. Maybe I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong. Because I've heard people, right? I heard people, oh, I wasn't sure if I want kids, but then I met you and I want kids. Okay, great. But I do think a person should self-reflect. I think there needs to be a time of self-reflection and having children. I think children are beautiful. They're wonderful. I think they're some of the most disrespected and undervalued living creatures, living beings on this planet. Look at our education system. I could go in on that. I could go off. Okay. That being said, that's actually why I wish people would even take it more seriously. That's why. It's because it's actually out of my love. Does that make sense? It's actually out of my love and respect for children that I feel like people like make sure you're in for this, because it's supposed to be for life. You know, it's not just a cute little doll. I'm really, you know, it's not just like a mini me, dress up, cute. You know, don't do that. Like, anyway.
It goes back to that blueprint, the checklist, the life script. You've been sold that this is what you're supposed to do, especially as a woman. And then you're going to be thought of as less than a woman if you don't use that.
Absolutely.
And God forbid anything's wrong with that, but then there's something wrong with you. So take that. That's one.
That's true.
One layer of hell that women have to go through. Then there's everyone around you is doing it. So, you know, finding your village of childbearing people is hard because it's kind of taboo. And then there's the whole idea that, or like you were saying, they're like a doll. Children are a status symbol in certain ways. You get the tax breaks, you get to brag about this extension of you's accomplishments, which is what you and I experienced, and that perfectionism, which then just goes and fucks up your kid. So now they need years of therapy that they maybe can or can't afford. Great. Fabulous. Society's going to do that to them if you don't as a parent anyway. So everyone's screwed. But if people really did do that introspective exercise and let those voices that are very loud in society, in your circle of friends, in your family out, if you blocked all them aside, that out, is that really what you want to do?
Yeah.
And if not,
it's okay.
Right. We're over here to tell you it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
And if you change your mind, that's also okay. And I don't think that that's something that should be so taboo to explore. Like the idea of not having children, because for every
it's scandalous it comes off as scandalous. It's very interesting. And, you know, kind of connected to what you were saying, I feel like there's a little more conversation now, which is good. There are women who have fertility issues, right? There are men, oh my gosh, there are men that have fertility issues, right? That's a fact, okay? And so it's really interesting because it's true. Like, women are made to feel quite literally that they're broken, they're useless, what's wrong with you? Your whole goal and purpose in life is to birth, right? It's really interesting, you know, how that plays out. And then we can get into this too. There's a lot of, how do I want to frame this? People will seek medical intervention, right? In terms of in vitro, IVF, right? Surrogacy, et cetera, et cetera. There is a hefty price tag, right? It is not inexpensive to pursue. So that, I feel, already is going to exclude a lot of people financially that cannot spend $10,000 a turn for, IVF, et cetera. I don't even know how much. It's very costly, right? Like I'm throwing out numbers, but it's at least $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 or more. And people don't, it's like there's, in other words, it's not so simple as find a person, get pregnant, have a child.
Right.
We're taught that. Actually, I think most of us growing up are taught like, don't have sex, you'll get pregnant, don't have sex.
Right, that's a heart.
Yeah, it's like, it's true. Isn't, and this, I've had very blunt conversations with my mom. I'm like, Mom, wait a minute. Don't have sex, don't get pregnant. And then it flips to, why haven't you had a child? Why haven't you had a baby? You're already 35. You're already 40. Da, da, da. Oh, side note, my mother, thank God bless her, she does not pressure me. Thank you, Lord. My mother is not a pressuring mother in terms of like having children or not having children or marriage or anything like that. Thank God. It's actually myself pressuring myself. Anyway, but that's a different thing. But yeah, it's true. It's like a flip. It's like a flip of it feels like a flip of a switch of like, be a virgin, now be a mom. Like,
wait, it's the Madonna whore thing that, our religion tends to
it's right there.
highlight.
It's right there.
That I remember having a conversation with my parents. So when we came back from Puerto Rico, we didn't have a place to live for a little while, and we stayed with my parents for about a week and a half, which is, a lot. And I remember talking with my parents one night. I don't know what we were talking about, but I'm like, you guys always told me not to get pregnant, so I never have been. And they just both sat there like, with like, what do you say to that? Yeah. What do you say to your 45-year-old daughter being like, you told me not to get pregnant, so I never have? Just like, and it's a weird thing to say, but I mean, that's my point. Like, it's so this messaging is so contradictory all throughout our lives. It's hard to make sense of what it is you're supposed to pay attention to. Pay attention to your gut. Exactly.
No, it is wild. It is wild. Yeah, and what this will kind of wrap up is like, yeah, it's like if a woman gets pregnant too young, oh my God, right?
Yeah.
There's that side too. There's that side too, like, oh no, teen pregnancy, you've ruined your life, single mom, that's that narrative, right? So it's like, I swear, it's like, you damned if you do, you damned if you do. It doesn't matter. We're always in trouble. We're always in trouble. Forever.
Regardless, the last thing I'll say on that is, regardless of what a woman chooses to do with her life, she will be wrong. Because there will always be someone very loudly telling her, you did this wrong. It's usually a man on the internet.
It's usually a man. Oh, man.
Yeah, or it will at least be a man on the internet telling you you're wrong. So just do whatever you damn well please.
Amen. Exactly. Do it. Yeah, exactly. Oh, my gosh. This was so good. Thank you, Paulette. This was fantastic. This was super fun. So, Paula, do you want to tell folks where they can find you on your podcast and everything?
Yeah. So on socials, I just go by my name, Paulette Erato, and I'm sure you'll have links to all of this. The podcast is called La Vida Chévere, the Childfree Latinas. So if you just look up, so you don't have to memorize that, just look up Childfree Latinas in any podcasting app. My face will come up. It's a pink background. That's the podcast. And then, if you are also a Latina who has a podcast, come join Latinas in Podcasting. It's free.
Yes. Oh my gosh, it's an amazing group. I've met a lot of fantastic people in the group. Paulette is amazing. And yes, thank you everyone who's listening. So this is the Gold Hoops and God podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Guerra. You can find the podcast everywhere you stream your podcasts. We're also on YouTube. You can watch the interview video there. New episodes are always available each Wednesday. Thank you so much, Paulette.
Bye.
Bye.